And welcome back to America's Hope. My next guest is Barbie Rivera. Before I really get into her story about the crossroads of education that we're discussing tonight, let me show you some of her artwork. She's a fine artist, self-taught, and you're looking at some of the displays of her talent. She's an artist, she's a mother of four, and she has been painting her way to fame and fortune. She thought that was her dream. However, in 1991, something changed after a teacher told her that her 6-year-old was mentally handicapped and in need of psychotropic medication. Well, Barbie put her paintbrushes aside and began to start a school from her home. She found teaching to be just as creative, if not more so, than fine art. And within the first week of homeschooling, Barbie had 7 additional students who were the children of friends, all learning to read, write, and do math. No stress, no homework, no state required tests. The word of mouth began to spread, creating such a demand that Barbie established a small private school, HELP, H-E-L-P. It's in Miami. And Barbie, you join us right now with more than 30 plus years of being involved in education of our little ones. Talk to me about why this became so special to you and how you've gone on to help your son and so many other students.
Well, it became it became a necessity. I felt I had no choice. My son was bilingual, so he spoke English and Spanish. He was the first grandson on the Cuban side of the family, so you can imagine how thrilled they were. And he was at 6. He had, you could take him anywhere. He was very friendly. He was very well mannered. He was, he asked appropriate questions. He went on sleepovers. And to me, he did all the normal things that boys did or children. And I feel like even though I was a young parent and I had 4, one right after the other, I think I told my children stories or read them stories every night for 9 or 10 years before the youngest one's like, okay, you can stop doing this now. So I was very hands-on, and every parent loves their child. And I was just so heartbroken when it was the second Friday of school, the second Friday. And the teacher's like, well, your son's mentally handicapped. And I'm like, that's not true. It's not true, not because would be one of these blind parents and I can't have a child with a disability. It's not about that. If my son was disabled, truly disabled, he's my responsibility anyway. But he wasn't. And to say he is, for me, is a slap in the face to people who truly have disabled children. Like I say, my son's doing sleepovers when he's 5. And there are some children who will never experience that joy, or parents who won't experience hosting the sleepover where there's 6 little kids in a tent in the living room and you're making the popcorn. And it's a little bit of chaos, and somebody always gets homesick and you have to call them up. But that's how it is. And to me, that's what parenting is. So school became a necessity. Like I felt I would lose my son if I kept him in school. Mm-hmm. I felt I would lose him. I already lost him, and he was 6.
And as a result of that, you've been able to do that. You created
Yes.
the organization called HELP, H-E-L-P. What does that stand for?
Okay, HELP. It's Help Miami, and it stands for the Hollywood Education and Literacy Project.
Okay.
Years ago, when I was homeschooling, I discovered a businessman and his wife, and they had a literacy program on Hollywood Boulevard that was really simple. And I'm like, I want to turn this protocol into a private school. So I went out and I saw what they were doing, and they had like a private school and a literacy center, 2 totally different things. But the similarity, what I could take away from their program really made the difference of me homeschooling my children and a few others And now me getting other people to homeschool so I could make my group bigger.
That's great.
So that's why I named it Help Miami.
Well, your opinion matters because it helped it helped in giving the building blocks to your children and others as well. And how have those children been doing since you launched this homeschool so many years ago?
Well, my oldest son is the only one who went to school, and he was in school for a year and a half, and it took me 2 years to undo what the school system did because he had zero. When he finished first grade, he was convinced he was stupid. That was what school did for my son. I gave them this vibrant, well-mannered citizen who was yes, ma'am, yes, sir, how can I help? You know, like this is how you want our children, is very respectful. Like if he was your neighbor, oh, Damon, he's a great neighbor. He sees you washing the car. Hey, can I help you? And like just a really, really nice little boy. And he finished first grade thinking he was stupid. He didn't get his confidence back probably until third grade. My daughter and my other 2 boys never set foot in school. So they never thought they were anything but brilliant. And again, I'm the mom, and I realize not every mom is like me. But for me, my connection with my children is I have to be on their side. And I'm not one of these moms like if a baseball bat went through your window, I'm going to pay, and my child's going to pay me. Like I'm going to hold them responsible. And when they say bad words in the kitchen, they will be told that they, if their rooms aren't clean on Friday, this was a policy because they'd always want friends sleeping over. Room's not clean by 4 o'clock, no one's sleeping over. And my son's like, but Mom, I did so much math work. And I'm like, yeah, your room's a mess. No one's sleeping over. Work it out next week, plan ahead.
You sound like my mother.
Yes. I wish I sounded like more mothers, because anyway, we could go off onto that.
So Barbie, what you encountered then, and the reason why you stepped in to take over as a parent to educate your child, and then subsequent to that, teaching other children, you wanted to give them, if I hear you correctly, a sense of loving education and raising that intellectual curiosity, and at the same time having not only a love for it, but making it fun for a young child to understand that life is adventurous and there's much you can learn about it. Am I getting your story right?
Yes, absolutely. And there's a lot to talk to that point, but that was it exactly. Like as an artist, I remember it was a life-changing moment. I had all of my art supplies could fit into a suitcase. Now I have a whole room full of art supplies, right? But at the time, they all could fit in a suitcase. And I had all 4 of my children were born. 2 of them were in diapers and, crawling around the floor. And I was like, gosh, I said this, I'll never create again. And instantly, I was like, that's a lie. What is more creative than being a parent to these 4 amazing individuals, human beings that I helped create that are vastly different, but joined by this family unit that I so love. And each of them brought something interesting. And today they're all adults and they love each other.
Just a refreshing story to hear what you've been able to do in the lives of your children and other children for 30 years now through your initiative, your homeschool, Help Miami. I want to take a break. When we come back, I'd like to talk to you about your new book called Enough is Enough. We'll be back with Barbie Rivera on America's Hope in just a moment. Welcome back to America's Hope. I'm talking to homeschooler and the founder of Help Miami, which is a homeschool in Miami, Florida, Barbie Rivera. And she has a new book called Enough is Enough. And this book fully documents the destructive agendas and psychological manipulation that American children are subjected to in mainstream public, private, and even charter schools, which aims to keep them, as you say, quoting here, drugged and keep them dumb. Talk to me about that.
That's right. That 100%. You said it perfectly. I wrote this book because, like, my kids are grown, and I'm very blessed that it turned out the way it did. Everything against me, like anybody who says, oh, I can't do it, I'm a single mom. Not true. You can do it. You can do it. You can do more than what you probably ever thought you could. And I took on education with no degree. I'm a high school graduate. But what happened to my son is a crime. And it just stayed with me of like, and when I started homeschooling, I'm like, if this is happening to Damon, who to me is above intelligence, he's 6, but he's above intelligence, then what's happening to the children that aren't read to every day, that don't go on sleepovers, who aren't in the Keys fishing, who aren't being led by a stable adult to explore the world? I realize not everybody can do that. I could. So if my son was targeted that way, what's happening to other kids? And so this book is like 30 years of observation, not only what my son went through, but what other children have gone through. And some of the stories are heartbreaking because it didn't end well. The child ended up, I speak to one girl, she was 12 or 13, and she was drawing. She had a sketchbook, and she drew all the time. And her mother complained to the girl's psychiatrist, oh, all she does is draw. And if you look at the drawings, and it's hearts and unicorns and puppies and flowers and vampire, she's a teenager. The psychiatrist prescribed her Prozac. And she was in my private school because she was having trouble in life. She talked back to her mom. She's a teenager. Like, she had no room. She was given no room to create, no room to be herself. So because she drew so much, she was labeled obsessive compulsive disorder and was prescribed Prozac. And 3 months later, she no longer drew. She no longer wanted to perform. I'm a small school. She did a play. She was amazing. She no longer wanted to perform. And the psychiatrist considered her, they don't use the word cured, but in a sense, she was cured because she no longer spoke back to her mother. So they put her back in mainstream education, like in a mainstream school. And I'm like, okay, that's heartbreaking. To me, that's criminal. Who's to say what the mom was doing? And when did art become a mental illness? There was nothing that, so what? She sketched all the time. I think Michelangelo probably sketched all the time.
Indeed. So Barbie, let me ask you then, because what I hear from you is this incredible sensitivity that you have to the hopes and dreams of our children, and making sure that as you teach these particular students, that you're reawakening that love for life and love for education by the way you teach, and you teach with care. You don't teach according to the standardized tests. Make sure you teach to pass the test so that your school district can be examined and say, best school district in the country, or what have you. But you're focusing on what children will need, the skills that they need to live life today and tomorrow.
Correct.
And why is that so important?
Well, to me, the education in general in the United States has sold out to the pharmaceutical companies, because now everything is like a psychologist has to give his stamp of approval, or a pharmaceutical. And if you look at a pharmaceutical company has to be behind the diagnosis. And if you look at all of the checklist that the teachers fill out, gets out of his seat, raises his hand, blurts out an answer, there is a logo from a pharmaceutical company. So they're very invested in making sure that we know when our child is rambunctious, that's a mental disorder. And I disagree completely. My children, I'm not a grandparent yet, but my children know when they have children, their children will not set foot in a daycare or any type of school. Like homeschooling is the only way it's going to go, just because of what they've seen.
And do you believe that that all public education is bad, given the fact that some great students and great minds and thought leaders and hope leaders have actually gone through public education and achieved something great not only for themselves but for society?
Well, it's hard to say everything is bad, because like I say, I'm a public school product. But I will tell you this, when I got, my little brother is 2 years younger than me. My kindergarten was already different than his kindergarten. He was not allowed to start kindergarten because he was given a psychological test. And my mother was present. And the question was, she came back, my gosh, you could light her on fire. She was so upset. The question they posed to my brother, who was 4, was, what's the difference between a cat and a mouse? And he says, well, a cat's a cat and a mouse is a mouse. And they considered him intellectually delayed, so he couldn't start kindergarten.
Wow.
And that's back in 1971. So it was already curving. And in my book, I go over all of the takedown from the 20s, where we bring in these philosophies that there is no spirit, there is no God. You are just your flesh and flesh.
What is your hope for America?
Well, my hope for America, what I actually write about it. It's the final chapter in my book. So a few years ago, I started collecting books from the early 1900s. This book here is an elementary 3rd and 4th grade math book from 1883. Why did I do this? Because in the 1900s, the United States was #1 in the world educationally. And there is a quote that I found, which is in my book, and I write the source, that in 1910 or 1913, 1% of the American children were illiterate. And this is like probably 5th grade to 9th grade. That was the group that was surveyed. And of the 1%, they stayed home and they worked on farms, because that was what you did in the early 1900s. But the public school system in the United States was so strong that it could wipe out world illiteracy. That's 1900s. That's 120 years ago. So you're like, what happened? And in my book, I cite what happened, and I go over comparative, like, for my son in the 1st grade to get 3 hours of homework is a crime. When I was in 1st grade, I didn't get homework. When I went to school, again, 1969, 70, 71, 72, I didn't get homework until the 5th grade, and that was writing spelling words 3 times each or 5 times each. It was not this drudgery. It was to teach you some responsibility, like, okay, here's a task. You have to retain the task. You have to do the task and bring the task in the next day. Fair enough. That's part of growing up. Good. But to interject that too early, in this book here, they tell you that they are hesitant to give a 3rd grader a textbook because, this is the philosophy back at the time, it could ruin the child's wish to learn by overwhelming him with significances. And I'm like, thank you. Thank you.
In other words,
Because
let
you
a child
want, and
be
it
a
also
child
says,
and teach a child as they develop and grow.
so what I did with my children was I was very strong with definitions of words, and I used things from long ago. or I wrote it myself. Like they would go to bed, story time, bath time, story time, bedtime, and then I would stay up and I would handwrite their worksheets. It was a lot of work.
A lot of work, yeah.
You know, and then one of them would want a dragon, one of them would want a snake, one of them would want that, and I would illustrate it all. So what I want to do is actually create a curriculum company and bring this back to life, where I define the words, I give the discussion points, so that parents and educators, one, they will rehab their education, because most of the people walking around today, they are victims of the same education my son was victim to. It's not great. They can't diagram a sentence or do equations. Okay, but we can fix that. So by putting a curriculum together, I want to have kindergarten to 8th grade, that if you have a grandchild, you're like, yeah, we're going to homeschool. And if you want to add religion to it, it's totally open to do that. Like, you can add your philosophy to it. And then for the teacher, it's not going to be so strict.
Barbie, look,
Yeah.
I want to thank you for what you do, and your passion, your zeal, and your love for children, and lighting up their eyes and minds to gravitate towards education that's fun, that's wholesome, and that's satisfying their curiosity about life and about all the different subjects that you've taught them. Thank you for what you've done for the past 30 years with Help Miami. And I'm sure a lot of students are looking back, and even parents thanking you for what you have deposited in their lives. And it all began with your son and your willingness to fight for your son. And
That's right.
That counts for everything. Thank you, Barbie
Thank you.
Rivera.